All right, welcome in college football week 13 here of the season, and it's getting fun. And we got 5 games that we're going to break down for you here today. 5 pretty big games here. SEC, Big Ten, of course, Indiana, Ohio State, not to mention the Big 12 with BYU and Arizona State. Plus, we'll take any questions on games you guys want to break down. It's the college football kickoff show here on WagerTalk TV. And we'll do it with the Thursday crew, so we welcome back in the pen. Ralph Michaels in the house, as well as Drew Martin and the one and only Rob Veno, ready to roll here on this week 13. And Ralph, let's kick it off in the SEC if we can here with Ole Miss taking on a rejuvenated Florida team. They got Langway back last week. And they dispatched LSU, no problem. They're back in the swamp, getting ready to take on Lane Kiffin and company here. Lane just trying to win out here. It's the best he can do. What do you think we're going to get over in Gainesville here this weekend?
Well, Joe, let me start this video by saying this is an actual client release for me on Mississippi. So obviously I'm very strong on the Rebels. You look at Florida and, like away returns, and they get a nice win. 339 yards. You know, they actually got outgained by 53 yards. But one of the differences was his mobility. They were not sacked. And they actually got 7 sacks against LSU. That was the complete difference in the game. But they're not getting sacks, those kind of sacks on Ole Miss. When I look at Ole Miss, they are the most dominant team statistically in college football, bar none. They've played the number 5 toughest schedule. Yards per game diff, that's offense minus defense. They're number 1 in the country, plus 230 yards per game. Yards per play diff, they are plus 3.2 yards every play they run, and they're number 2 in points per game diff at 27.8. We also have an Ole Miss team that is rested. When I looked at teams that had a late season bye from game 9 or later, and they've won 75% of their games, and they're now an away favorite of 4 or more, they have gone 15-5, 75% ATS. When I look at Lane Kiffin as the Rebels head coach, as an away favorite of 4 or higher, he is 8-1 against the spread. The only game he failed to cover as a big away favorite was last year in the Egg Bowl, and that was a 17-7 win. I believe it was bad weather, and he only failed to cover that by half a point. So he's been very competitive when going on the road. I look at Florida. They're a team that now thinks no problem. All we have to do is win one of our last 2 games, and they're likely to do that, you know, with Florida State on deck. But from game 9 on and later in the season, teams with 5 wins that are a home dog are only 60 and 89 against the spread. That is 40% ATS. And teams that are a conference home dog of 10 or more that are off a conference win, only 48 and 87, 35.6%. Lastly, we have a Florida team that was on the field for 92 plays against LSU last week. Florida's defense on the season has been on the field longer for more plays than all but 4 teams in the FBS. Ole Miss is number 19 in plays per game run. We're going to see Florida's D wilt here. Ole Miss dominates the game. They're number 2 in explosive plays of 20 yards or more. Florida number 125 explosive defensive plays allowed. Mismatch. Give me the Rebels.
All right, back in Ole Miss to get it done, says Ralph there. Don't forget, guys, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Become part of the WagerTalk TV family. We appreciate you stopping by. Want to send a shout out to those joining us live. Titan CT in the house. K Loot in the house. Always a pleasure to see you guys. GPT 2000. We will talk a little Colorado, Kansas coming up for you But we do want to welcome in Drew Martin to the show. And Drew is going to talk about another big SEC matchup here, Drew, as Kentucky get ready to take on Texas. Now, Texas, they got a pretty big game coming up, Drew, next week against Texas A&M. But they got to get through Kentucky and handle business here. Do you think they will rather easily? You think Kentucky can give them a run for the money? They gave Ole Miss a run for the money and won that game. Can Kentucky pull another upset here?
You know what, Joe? At first glance, to answer your question, my eyes were going on the Longhorns here. But to how you just ended that intro, Kentucky did give Ole Miss a little bit of a run. And look at their schedule. They also gave Georgia all they could handle, losing by 1 point. And they stayed well within the number against Tennessee as well. So some of the three best teams in the SEC, Kentucky's given them all they could really handle. And looking at the Texas side of things, you know, Joe, we've gotten to the point in the season, especially this year, with all the changes in college football, you just can't kind of look at the SEC moniker. You could do this in the Big Ten as well, these bigger conferences, and be like, oh, it's an SEC team. They all play, you know, it's all the same. Not at all. Look at these two teams in the difference of schedules. I mean, Longhorns fans, you might want to kind of do some earplugs here. You might not want to hear this, but go look at Texas's schedule. Joe, their best win is against the Florida Gators with a third-string Ivy League quarterback taking snaps back there. This team has beaten absolutely nobody. I mean, they played Georgia. They lost outright as the favorite by 2 touchdowns. I have my questions here about Texas. Yes, very good recruits. Seems to be a well-coached team. They are playing at home. However, you know, this is a team that really hasn't beaten anybody, and they're hosting Kentucky. Pretty good defense overall. They're 3-0, 100% as an underdog, covering in those 3 games by 40 ATS points. So they've been underpriced in this role. They're coming off of playing an FCS team as well. I wouldn't be surprised here, Joe, if they stay within 3 touchdowns. This is a pretty big number. Lastly here, guys, the profile. If you're betting on Texas, they're going to have to win by 3+ touchdowns. And the market is telling us points are going to be at a premium. Look at this total, sub 50, 47. That's a low total. I lean with the dog, Joe. I wouldn't be surprised if Kentucky gives them a game here. So let's go with the Kentucky Wildcats, plus 20 and a hook.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me. I mean, we've said it, Drew, all year long. I like that defense of Kentucky for sure. And they're going to have to play well to give themselves an opportunity offensively to get in there. But I wasn't all that impressed with Texas's win last week. So we'll see what they've got here with Texas A&M on deck. And don't forget, if you are joining us live here on the stream, drop a game or two that you want to talk about or hear about or have questions about in the chat room. We'll get to them here once we're done going around the horn as we welcome in Rob Veno, who is going to visit the Big Ten. And yes, we will get to Indiana and Ohio State in a roundtable discussion coming up. But in the meantime, Illinois taking on Rutgers. Veno, interestingly enough, Rutgers pulling off a couple of wins here as of late. I still don't like their team. Although Illinois, I can't seem to get right. I don't know whether we should be backing them. I liked Michigan State, and Illinois embarrasses them. So Rutgers bowl eligible now. I think that was their 6th win, right? Illinois hovering at 5-5. What do we got here in this one? It's a pick 'em price.
Yeah, rightfully so, right, Joe?
Yeah.
I mean, try to differentiate these two. You just can't do it. They're like mirror images. But let's go through some stuff. You talked about it. Each side is now qualified to be in a bowl game. Illinois 7-3, Rutgers 6-4. Of course, here mid-November in New Jersey, you want to check weather, and it's going to rain. It's already raining today, and it'll rain tomorrow. But the weather's going to be clear on Saturday, 50 degrees. About 15-mile-per-hour winds, which I don't think affects either quarterback in this game. Take a look at Illinois on the Big Ten road. You know, they really haven't been on the road much this season. They're 1-2 straight up. The only reason why I mentioned straight up and not their miserable ATS record is because you basically just have to win this game. They won in overtime at Nebraska, and no shame in the 2 that they lost, though. You go to Oregon, you lose by 29. You're supposed to lose. They went to Penn State, covered the number. lost by 14. But like I say, there's nothing wrong with that. Each team, little bit of streak breaker. You talked about being on the Michigan State side last week. I can confidently say that you were probably not the only one on Michigan State. That line got pushed down. Not a lot of love for Illinois because they were playing poorly up until that game. Lost back-to-backs to Oregon and Minnesota. Come up with a big win. Rutgers, the same thing. Prior to these last two wins, they lost 4 straight. And then they show up out of nowhere, beating Minnesota and Maryland. And we'll get into what they did defensively in those 4 games, which wasn't good in a second. But when I started to go through these things, Joe, I just said, who's got more motivation here? And I can't even come up with a clear answer on that. Rutgers, if they do win this game on Saturday, they can set 3 football school marks. They've never won 3 straight games in the Big Ten. They've never won 4 Big Ten games total in a season. And they haven't beaten a ranked team in 15 years. So there's a lot, Greg Schiano's a great motivator. I could just, see him telling his team, listen, we've never won 3 in a row against conference teams, and we've never won 4 in a conference season. So they'll be fired up. I think Illinois, Brett Bielema, not a bad motivator himself. They have an opportunity here at 7 wins. They got Northwestern next week. They win this, they win that, they're up to 9. It probably puts them in one of the upper echelon Big Ten bowl games. It's likely to be either the Citrus or ReliaQuest, one of those two. The Orlando and Tampa games used to be the Outback, I think, for ReliaQuest. New Year's Eve games, that's a big deal. If they win that game, they get 10 wins in a season. So I think each side is motivated. Quarterback play. Listen, Ethan Kaliakmanis, they call him the Greek rifle for Rutgers. He's been a lot better than advertised. They thought of him as a game manager. He's been far more than a game manager, 6 TDs and only 1 INT in his last 3 games, got a little bit of mobility. And, of course, Luke Altmaier, we've said all season long, he's avoided mistakes. He doesn't look like the kid that played for Louisiana Tech and then last year at Illinois. A lot better here. When you think of these two, you think of ground and pound kind of. But their run defenses inside the Big Ten both stink. They're 14th and 15th inside the Big Ten in run defense. So where do you find any difference in this game to confidently pick a team and say, I like that side? To me, I think it comes down to a couple of things. Illinois has got a really good pass rush. Number 4 in the Big Ten in quarterback sacks. Rutgers doesn't really they do protect the quarterback fairly well. Only 1.5 sacks per game. So, who wins that battle? And then I flip it around, and can Illinois protect their quarterback? Altmaier's gone down 28 times this year. It's the second highest total in the Big Ten. But Rutgers doesn't really rush the quarterback. So is it good or bad? I'm not sure. Rutgers defensively, 443 total yards or more allowed in 3 of their last 4 games. And yet they won a couple of those. Not that great. It's a red flag on their pass defense. Their pass defense, how about this? 383 to UCLA, they allowed, 308 to USC, and 335 to Maryland. If Altmaier in the passing game can come up with anything, I can understand why people have pushed this from 46.5 to 47.5. It makes some sense. Illinois has been way better defensively on the statistical board overall in total defense. I think for me, I'm going to lean towards Rutgers and the motivation and the emotion that they're playing with right now. Schiano is a good motivator. And they have Kyle Monangai, their star running back, who's probably the best runner on the field. Rutgers has been doing it with smoke and mirrors a little bit. And this is a team you could probably do it with smoke and mirrors again. So slight lean towards Rutgers, very, very slight lean towards over.
Oh, it's a tough one, Rob. It really is. It's a coin flip. I'll say this, though. I mean, Illinois, they got what, a win here. Then I think they only have Northwestern left. And, all of a sudden they could be a 9 or 10 win team this year, which is kind of crazy. Because I didn't have them pegged as that, but that's the kind of season it has been. And Schiano, quality defense, don't turn the ball over, get out yarded. You can still win games in the Big Ten. That's what it's all about. But should be an interesting one here, as should be, of course, the 2 big remaining games that we're going to break down for you guys here. One of them in the Big 12 with BYU and Arizona State. That's coming up. And, of course, the big one there, Indiana taking on Ohio State. Want to send a shout out to Evie Evans in the house. He's got a question about New Mexico State and Middle Tennessee State. I've got a question about your choice of games, but that's a whole different conversation we can have when we address that coming up here. Didn't expect that one there. Titan CT. Also, we've got G Hurt in the house. Wants to know about our thoughts on Pitt. Anthony in the house, too. We got all sorts of folks joining us here on the live show. If you have any questions, drop them in there, guys. We'll get to them, but we're going to talk Indiana, Ohio State here, and it should be a lot of fun. And we're going to learn very quickly whether or not this Indiana team is for real, because I've been hearing a lot, Ralph, this week that they've played nobody. They're going to get exposed. What are we up to? 12 and a half now, 13. I'll say this about Indiana. Watched them a lot. Quality quarterback. It's a well-coached team that doesn't shoot themselves in the foot, Ralph. And while they certainly haven't played the same level of competition as Ohio State, you can only play the teams that are on your schedule, Ralph. And quite honestly, I didn't think any of them were particularly close. They were clearly the better team on the field. Can they hang and even do the unthinkable and throw total chaos into this playoffs this year by beating Ohio State?
No, not at all.
You want to think about it, Ralph? You want a minute? Yeah, we can come back to it. No, you're good? No, it's not happening.
They played nobody and they're going to get exposed. How's that? So like those words were in my head, Joe. I don't know where the hell they came from. Let me quantify the schedule. Okay. Indiana fans, again, not to cut you short, Joe's right. You can only play who was on the schedule. And let me say this. I told you Ole Miss was number one in yards per play diff. That is my number one go-to category. Yards per play offense minus defense. Ole Miss was number one that I talked about earlier. Ohio State is number two. Indiana is number three. So statistically, you are correct. They have been incredibly, uber successful. But when you look at strength of schedule, Ohio State has played the number 9 schedule, and Indiana has played the number 62 schedule. I think that's the lowest among any Power 4 team at this point in the season. And even to take that one step further, Indiana's played 3 road games. Michigan is number 100. UCLA offense rank number 121. Northwestern offensive rank 129. Michigan State offensive rank number 104. So their average road game offense is ranked over 110. Guess what? Ohio State is number 12 in the country in points per game and number 17 in yards per game. That is going to be a culture shock. I went to the database and I looked for teams that were an away dog of 3 or more that are undefeated with at least 7 wins. So you're at least 7-0 to start the season. You're playing an opponent with at least 1 loss. It's only happened 34 times in the last 12 years. But those teams, undefeated away dogs of 3 or more against a team with at least 1 loss, 10 ATS wins, 24 ATS losses. When I looked at 2 AP top 10 teams and one was a double-digit favorite, that double-digit favorite has gone 7-3 ATS since 2011. Again, so it only happens maybe once a year in that case. So I will say this, those AP top 10 double-digit favorites are 9-1 straight up. The one loss was Ohio State against Michigan State back in 2015. But again, that was a completely different team. You know, when I look at Indiana, they passed the eye test. But again, they've passed the eye test against weaker foes. Having played 3 weak opponents on the road and now having to go to a sold-out Ohio Stadium, I can only lean Ohio State. I am not betting against Indiana. I am not betting on Ohio State. But if you said pick a side, the Hoosiers have to prove it to me this week. And I think Ohio State does get it done.
So you're saying there's a chance, Ralph? Is that what I was? No? Okay. Drew, let me ask you here, man, because if anybody can take a look at the other side, it would be you. 2 touchdowns. I mean, it was 12.5. It's getting closer to 2 touchdown mark. The total is also interesting. That seems to come down a little bit, and the trends tell us that that's probably not a bad look either. That maybe the defenses are going to be the stars of the show here. At least one defense anyway. But how do you approach this game with these 2 top 25 teams with a lot riding on the line with time to prepare?
Oh, it's a great game. Yeah, I can't wait for this one. I mean, a lot riding on the line for sure here, Joe. I guess the way I would look at this is Indiana's run defense, Joe. I feel like we're going to know pretty early on in this one, in the first quarter, because when you look at the Hoosiers run D, it's near tops in the country in terms of rush yards given up. The problem is the rushing offenses that they've gone up against, really nobody ranks in the top 50. So now they're going up against this Ohio State team, which, you go by 4 and 5 star recruits. It's nowhere close. It's like 60 on the Ohio State roster and like 10 on the Indiana roster. Not that I handicap off of that, but it's something to have in the back of your mind. So if Ohio State's able to get the push up front, get that running game going, control the clock, this might be a long day for the Hoosiers. However, if Indiana's run defense does step up, keeps their numbers somewhat similar to what they've been so far this season, I think they're going to be right in it, Joe. I really do. I mean, you bring up, big time game, big time atmosphere. The problem with Ohio State this year in the Big Ten contract on Fox, it's all big noon games. So, this is an 11 o'clock a.m. kick time, local time. I think that actually hurts Ohio State. Not to mention Indiana off of the bye week. They're 3-0 straight up and against the spread on the road this season. And they've blown out the odds makers projections in this role on the road. Look, if Indiana can hold up run defense, like I explained, I think it becomes, who has the better quarterback. Welcome to modern day college football. Will Howard versus Curtis Rourke. And I like Indiana's chances with that, Joe. I really do. Plus the fact you get near 2 touchdowns in your pocket. Hey, man, give me the Hoosiers.
Yeah, I mean, and they've had, Drew, it's a good point here. There are a couple of scenarios that could play out, certainly here, Rob Veno, where we could say, hey, Ohio State's got a few different ways to beat you here. Indiana, maybe not so many options, but it's an elimination game for Indiana, and they've had 2 weeks to prepare. I mean, this is one of the best college coaches we've seen in a long time. Saban disciple of sorts here, and I don't think it's going to be the atmosphere is going to be an issue. I think he's going to have these kids ready to go. The question is the talent on the field. Can they hang, Rob Veno? Can they hang with this Ohio State team?
Yeah, I think this is one of those games, Joe, where the underdog, despite all their wonderful numbers, really is going to have to out-scheme the favorite, right? You don't expect Indiana's receivers to beat Ohio State's defensive backs. You don't expect Indiana's offensive line to just push Ohio State's defensive line around. Ohio State, for what it's worth, since that 32-31 loss to Oregon, their defense has given up 2 touchdowns in 4 games. It's athlete-wise, Indiana's not going to come in there man-on-man and win that game. It's on Cignetti and his staff to out-scheme this team, to show them stuff, Ohio State stuff that keeps them on their heels. And I don't put it past him. I don't put it past him simply because he's got a QB and Curtis Rourke that can read defenses really quick. His pass protection is going to have to be good. He's not much of a runner. And I could sit here and tell you that Ohio State, in my mind, if things went right for them, could potentially score 14 points off their defense, whether it be returns for touchdowns or whether it be turnovers forced that put them in short field situations. I don't know that I can say the same about Indiana, but I do have one question here for Ohio State. Now, their starting center, from what I read this week, Seth McLaughlin, is out for this game. Yep. There's some offensive line shuffling going on at Ohio State. And of all, left tackle, probably the premier spot in an offensive line, but center, the most underrated spot because he makes all the offensive line calls. He looks at where the defense is going, what they're doing, and calls it out to everybody else. So you start moving your guard to center, putting a substitute guard in at guard, and I know Ohio State reloads. It's just something that you don't want to have to go through in the 11th game of the season when you're facing, an opponent that's a contender for the conference title. In the end, I think Ohio State's probably too good. They're probably 14 better. Will Howard continues to be the most underrated. You think Kansas State wants Will Howard back now after watching Avery Johnson and his show? Great athlete, but I mean, the guy's all over the place with the ball. So I think Will Howard will be steady, and Indiana's defense is going to be tested. I think if I had to, I'd play Ohio State.
If you're leaning, you're going to Ohio State. And Ralph, let me ask you. I know there was a question in there. And by the way, I believe the kid that's going to be stepping in for McLaughlin, the center that came over from Alabama, I believe he transferred in, was the center last year, Ralph. I believe he was starting center last year. So it's not like they're taking a redshirt freshman off the bench. The guy played all last year, so he's got plenty of experience. I don't know that losing the center is all that big a deal, but does this affect the total at all in your mind, though, Ralph? 2 top 25 teams, kind of an elimination game. Should we be looking at the under here?
In the NFL, it's much more important. So, it's a great point. I will never play on a team the game after they lose their an experienced starting center into the midseason. That's how cohesive they are. College football, a little bit less. The backup does have experience. McLaughlin is out for the year. It was an ACL, so they shut him down. So at least it's not a one game mode that they think they're going to switch back. And I think that actually helps the offensive line as well. So I don't think this adjusts to the total. I did want to bring up one more point, and Drew brought up about, the rush offenses that the Hoosiers have faced and why their numbers are so good. They've played one FBS team, one Power 4 team this year that has an offense that was better than 75. That's it. And that was Maryland. And against Maryland, they allowed a season-high 401 yards. So to me, I lean over, even with the center issues. Yes, it may cause some issues early, but there's so much talent around that center, I'm not worried about it.
All right. That's going to be, we're going to learn a lot. You might have to pay in order to find out if Indiana is for real. But boy, oh boy, if you think Ohio State runs the table, and there's a lot of people think Ohio State, not Oregon, is the best team in the country, well, they got to get through this Indiana team first, and we'll see. I think that's going to be a fun one. And so is the last game that we'll break down before we start diving into some of the games that have been dropped into the chat room. I can tell you this, though. I know Ross Huff there over on YouTube Shorts says, hey, better sprinkle a little something on that money line with Indiana as well if you're taking the points. And I can't argue with that. David Silva says you can only play your schedule. Absolutely true there. There are some guys going, why are we not looking at the alternate line here with Ohio State and just ladder it up there? What do you think there, Veno? Ladder it up with Ohio State, lay to 12.5 to 14.5 to 16.5. If you think it's going to be that big of a blowout, just ladder it on up there. Oh, mute it. I don't think he likes the ladder, Dan. It could be me.
Yeah, I'm afraid of heights, guys. I'm afraid of heights. So no Ferris wheels, no ladders. Yeah, I'd rather wait in game. If you see signs real early, first quarter, where you think Indiana's getting pushed around, then in game is almost the same working as a ladder. Of course, you pay the price for in game rather than getting it ahead of time. But it's hard to project what might happen on the field before it starts where ladders are concerned. I don't play them a lot. I will say this, team totals are not available yet, but if you really love Ohio State's defense and you don't think that Indiana man-to-man offensively can attack Ohio State consistently throughout the game, if you just use the line given here from the odds makers, it looks like about 32.5 and 19.5. Indiana team total under 19.5 if things go wrong. probably is a way that I would look, or you could look Ohio State over 32.5 if you think they'll just dominate that defense. Again, Ohio State just looks like the better team athletic, and they've gone to Oregon and to Penn State already. I'm sure they're not going to see much different in Indiana than what they saw there.
No, I agree with you there. I think maybe the best part about this game is going to be the fact, guys, that if Ohio State blows out Indiana, and beats them and beats them handily, all that does is give the committee a reason to put yet another 2-loss SEC team in the top 12 and only put Penn State in the conversation as a 1-loss Big Ten team. Because if it comes down to an 11-1 Indiana who gets blown out by Ohio State, tell me I'm wrong, Drew. Tell me that the committee's not going to put a 2-loss Tennessee team or somebody else from the SEC. They're going to look at that and go, sorry, just you played nobody. And when you did play somebody, you got crushed. It feels like Indiana keeps it close. They don't have to worry about the playoff. Indiana gets blown out. The committee has a reason to make sure they don't end in the top 12.
Sure, Joe. I don't disagree with you. And even exponentially more if that team is Alabama. We've seen no other team in college football get more of the benefit of the doubt than the Alabama Crimson Tide. I actually think it's a great case study to see now with Nick Saban gone, do they get that same treatment from college football in general? You got to remember, like half of ESPN's staff in terms of their announcers, College Game Day, all went to the University of Alabama in some form or fashion. So keep that in mind, because I think people are actually influenced by these broadcasters on the big name networks like that. And I'll also add on to this, Joe. One other reason to look towards the Hoosiers is because I think they kind of know that, if they're down 20 and they can punch in another touchdown, or something in that nature. They're down 17, 20 points and they can punch in another touchdown. I think that that's the quintessential backdoor cover here, Joe. And two, when it does come down to that and they're 11-1, they might get the benefit of the doubt there if they were like, hey, we're within 2 scores, to put in an Indiana from the Big Ten over a 2-loss SEC team. That could all come into the mix here, into this equation.
Yeah, it's. I feel like this game is going to be pretty big when it all comes to what happens there at the top 12 there, Ralph, because they're always going to side SEC over Big Ten. I hate to break the news to everybody, but that's just a reality.
Yeah, do you think that the Big Ten commissioners calling up Ohio State and said, let Indiana stay close so we can get 4 teams and fill our coffers with all this playoff money?
A lot more money involved there, that is for sure, but just feels like any reason they can, they'll find a ways to put in a 2-loss SEC team. All right, so we got another game. How about the Big 12, the Forgotten Conference, which also is in the midst of total possible chaos here with a whole lot of teams battling for a opportunity to win the Big 12. And I don't know, who had BYU, Arizona State, this big a game in Week 13 in the college slate to determine what's going to happen with the Big 12 championship, because that's where we're at right now. BYU losing at home in Provo last week to Kansas. Everybody keeps waiting for the wheels to fall off Arizona State, Ralph, and they don't fall off. They just keep winning games. Took on Kansas State, beat them in Kansas State. Now they're home laying a field goal. Do you trust BYU to bounce back here, or does Arizona State just keep winning games that everyone seems to think they shouldn't win?
Yeah, well, if there wasn't this guy over at Indiana as the head coach, I would vote for Kenny Dillingham as coach of the year. It took him 2 seasons to get rid of the train wreck of what Edwards caused, but you watch Arizona State now. They are physical on both sides of the ball. They are just a solid team, running for 191 yards per game and 4.6 yards per carry. Defense allowing 138 yards per game and 3.8. Those are the kind of numbers I want to see for a team I'm taking at home. Now, we have to remember this. I've talked about this on shows for years, as Rob and Drew have as well. Historically in college football, you lose that first game and you're a team like BYU, you're out of it. Your bubble is burst. This is now a flat spot. there's no chance in hell you're making the playoffs as a BYU team with one loss going against the Big Ten and Big 12. But this one loss does not hurt them at all. The loss last week against Kansas, they can write it off. They run the table against Arizona State and Houston, and they win the playoff. They are in the college playoffs as the Big 12 champions. So, again, the numbers of the bubble bursts and off the first loss of the game, you have to throw those out this year with the 12 teams playoffs. You know, I actually like the BYU team. I did it early, and then I watched them a couple times, and again, they're nothing flashy. They're a team that runs the ball 35 times a game. Their offensive and defensive rush numbers are about the same. You know, their sacks are the same on both sides, but they just don't make a lot of mental mistakes. They keep themselves in the games, and they pull out the wins. So, I look at it, and I originally liked Arizona State a little bit, but I think BYU off the loss, it actually helps them. I think Arizona State off that upset win against Kansas State hurts them. So I'm looking at that flip-flop situation. Off a home loss as a home favorite, win as a home dog. They match up the next week. And I did pull one thing out that let me get to my note. I closed my note down for some reason. When you look at teams that were ranked in the top 20 and lost as a home favorite, and they're now an away dog from game 8 or later. So we're in the second half of the season. You were a ranked team. You lost as a home favorite. Now you're an away dog. Joe, those games have gone 2-24. Oof. That's 7.7% to the over, 92.3% to the under. So keep that in mind this game. Top 20 teams lose with defense, lose and come back with an inspired defense. I look at Arizona State's defense. I look at BYU's defense. To me, under is the way to go in this game.
Interesting, Ralph, because and that's an interesting take because I'm seeing if I'm Arizona State at home this year, Ralph, looks like I don't think they've scored less than 27 points a game. Are you that confident in BYU to be able to limit them?
Well, again, UCF, Utah, Kansas, Mississippi State, and Wyoming. You know, this BYU squad is actually number 12 in the country, holding foes to 83 yards per game under their average. So to me, the Arizona State offense is actually underperforming. They're actually number 69 with averaging only 6 yards per game more than their opponents allow. So I think the Arizona stats are more impressive because of who they played. Again, a closer to an Indiana type schedule.
Right. Okay. Well, there you go, Drew. What are you thinking, man? Would you pick a side, a total in this one? This game's going to go a long way into deciding, and anything can happen, it appears, in the Big 12. The scenarios are all over the place on who's going to end up playing for the title and already automatically punch their ticket. But have you looked at BYU, Arizona State at all this year? I mean, it feels like a lot of people have gotten both these teams wrong.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Joe. I mean, and yeah, I've watched both of these two teams. In Arizona State, they've really come on. You know, even it was like week earlier in the season, they played Texas State. People might remember, I believe it was a Thursday nighter. Mm-hmm. And they were actually an underdog in that game. And like the whole world was on the Texas State Bobcats. And I'm like, man, Arizona State, you know, I've seen them play a couple times. Kenny Dillingham, their head coach. He's a Gus Malzahn disciple, kind of runs a little bit of the same offense there. Good coach overall. Sure enough, they won that game. Man, they've been a pretty good moneymaker here, Joe. Now they're at home, -3 flat. They're 5-0 straight up and against the spread at home. It's a tough place to play there in the desert. And BYU, I feel like they're kind of falling off a little bit. They're off their first loss. I actually like Arizona State, -3-point favorite.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it, Drew. I'm kind of with you there. Rob Veno, what are you thinking about in this spot here? And are any of these one of these two teams winning the Big 12? What do you think here, Veno? I mean, are they that good, or is just the Big 12 that much parity?
It's got to be that much parity, right, Joe? Because none of these teams, neither of these teams were expected to be in the positions that they are. Credit to the coaching. Credit to the protection of the football. A lot of credit, Drew just mentioned Kenny Dillingham. And just take a second, when he entered as an offensive coordinator, I think he was like 27 or 28 years old, considered a young offensive whiz under the wing of Gus Malzahn, ran with a lot of pace. Mm-hmm. Everywhere he went was pace, pace, pace. And he must have looked at his team this year and said, the heck with pace. We're much better if we slow it down and shorten games. These two teams, and this is going to go to Ralph's point about the trend that he threw out there with unders in this particular situation. But if you throw some fundamentals into that technical trend, ASU is 98th in seconds per play in the country. BYU is 113th. Arizona State runs a play every 27 seconds. The other side runs one every 27.8. And for Arizona State, it's gotten even slower. The last 3 games, 30.1 per play. That's almost the entire play clock. And why not when you have Cam Scatterbo running the football? BYU better come to tackle, because I know that Ashton Genty gets a lot of praise in the fact that he makes yards after contact. But Scatterbo, I hear it pronounced 2 different ways. It's spelled Scatterbo, but a lot of guys a lot of announcers say Scatterbo. Whatever. First guy doesn't bring him down. So let me just run you some numbers of yards per rush allowed by BYU in their last 5 games. 5.4, 7.1, 4.9, 4.8. The other game was against Utah. They only allowed 3.8. But teams that can run the football have run it against BYU, and I think they use tempo, much does Arizona State, to stay in games. So it'll be interesting. I'm kind of in the camp with Drew, where I see Arizona State coming on. Last week, watching that game, Avery Johnson, QB of Kansas State, against Sam Leavitt, QB of Arizona State. Leavitt looked like the better quarterback. He's not the more talented guy, but he's a better quarterback. And Dillingham's got a pretty good concept offensively. Both are pretty decent defensively. In BYU's defense, the last 2 games where, it looks like maybe they're slipping. Total yardage doesn't say that they're slipping. They outgained those 2 teams, Utah and last week against Kansas State, by 80 by 80 and 92 yards. So they're still holding teams down, just making a few mistakes that they hadn't made earlier in the year. Good game, but I think I would lean a little bit towards Arizona State, probably more towards the under, though.
Leaning towards the under in that one there, but still a lot to be determined when it comes to the Big 12, and the Big 12 championship should be very interesting over the next couple of weeks. All right, it's now your turn, guys. If you are joining us live on the stream here today, we appreciate you hanging with us. Roger Long, Bill Sandoval, Titan CT, David Silva, Hanosha in the house, Gene Walker, Ross Huff. We appreciate you guys across the board. If you have a game that you want to run by these guys, get their thoughts, drop them in the chat room. And if you're watching on the replay, go ahead, drop them in the comment section, as we'll be answering all your questions right up until kickoff on Saturday. Don't forget, do the thing with the buttons too, the like, and you know how that all works. All right, let's dive into some of these games. Bill Sandoval wants to know on whether or not Army is staying within 14.5 damn points of Notre Dame. Rob Veno, I don't see how in the hell. Didn't we just see this against Navy with Notre Dame? Wasn't this the same damn game? And it didn't work out well for Navy. A lot of money coming in on Army. It feels like Notre Dame is the public darling here, but the public's not always wrong, Veno.
No, and you took the words out of my mouth. We kind of saw it with Navy, right? Navy and Army comparable this year. I think the difference, the separator here has been Army's been a little bit better defensively, but it's still the same game. Notre Dame has already seen option offense in play this year in the Navy game. Their defense is outstanding. And unlike a lot of these other teams that can make some hay with the conference playoff committee or the college playoff committee, Notre Dame, not having a conference, has to just go out and continue beating the tar out of teams. So If they get the opportunity, like against Navy, they will. Army's likely to be exposed here. The schedule hasn't been great that they've played. I don't know where it ranks across the 134 in the country, but it hasn't been outstanding whatsoever. They haven't really beaten anybody impressively. And there's been a lot of games where they gave up a lot of points. You're going to go up against this Notre Dame offensive line and defensive line. I know a lot of the handicapping I do is done through trenches, and the trench play here should really favor Notre Dame. You wonder, because Army is kind of that one-trick pony that needs to have controlled drives. If you can't get a 13, 14-play drive against Notre Dame, you're not going to come close, and I don't know that they can do that. Joe Daly can throw the football a little bit, but to me, Navy is the more passing effective team with Horvath than Army is with Daly. I mean, you're splitting hairs there, but I think Navy's a little bit more effective in that, and they'll go to the pass a little bit more. Army really needs to run and have long drives to end up getting in the end zone, and I don't know if that happens here.
Ralph, any TNA in the Army Notre Dame game of interest? I don't know if you came across anything while handicapping this game during the week, but it feels like Notre Dame's already prepared for the triple option with Navy. It just feels like what surprises is Army going to throw at Notre Dame? It's at Yankee Stadium, for those that don't know, which is ironic here, Drew. It's not a home game one way or the other, but it also kind of feels like maybe if you think Notre Dame runs away with it, Drew, what do you think? Team total under in this game here? Maybe fade Army moving the ball and scoring a ton of points like they've done on just about everyone this year?
That's what I was looking at. I think Notre Dame could have some success, Joe. On defense, I mean, Rob brought up and yourself brought up, against the Navy. I know it's not the same offense, but there is option principles there. So, yeah, if you need something, I mean, I think it's cool. I like that college football plays these games in baseball stadiums. I kind of like that aspect. So I'll definitely be watching, and I might get there with Notre Dame. Don't love the number, particularly against the military academy with the season that Army's had. But I kind of like the Irish in this situation. I'll throw out another one. I know somebody asked the question, New Mexico State and Middle Tennessee State, Joe, Conference USA action. This is right up my alley. I've watched more games of New Mexico State and Middle Tennessee State than I really should admit on the internet here. And Middle Tennessee State is bad. I mean, their quarterback's all right. He can kind of throw it downfield. He throws pretty footballs. But this MTSU, the talent they have on their roster is just not very good. I know it's a tough trip for New Mexico State, Las Cruces, New Mexico to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and New Mexico State's back-to-back road games. They just played an SEC team. But I just think top to bottom of the roster here, Joe, New Mexico State's the better team. So overall, I mean, catching points too? I like them on the points, but even more so the money line. I think the Aggies take this. Give me New Mexico State.
Yeah, I mean, it's both teams, look at 7-8 losses here. You're right. I mean, both teams have some issues there. But to your point, that quarter, Nick, is it Vadiano? I think he's an Italian kid, right? Is it at him?
Yeah.
The kid has actually been pretty good, but, the problem is he also throws the ball a lot to the other team. So feels like an over, too, there, Drew. But yes, and yes, Dan, I'm very impressed, Dan, that you even found the logos for this game, to tell you the truth. I didn't think the game was even listed, but congratulations there, Dan. That was well done. And that was for, I believe, was it Evie Evans in the house? Asking for that one. You guys are welcome. We will scrape the bottom of the barrel for you, for sure. What do you got, Ralph?
I don't have any TNA in Notre Dame. I was just going to comment on Rob's. On the strength of schedule I use, Rob, they are number 120. That is Army this year, strength of schedule. So only 14 teams have played a weaker schedule. And again, this is their first group of 5 team. The most physical team they've played all year is, I don't know, Air Force, North Texas, East Carolina. There really isn't one. So you're talking the weakest of the week. But, Joe, I have to rewind 1 second.
Sure.
My head sort of blew up there. I wrote this down. November 21st at 2:01 p.m. Rob Veno gave out an under?
Yes. And he supported
Doesn't
you
happen.
with it. Yeah, leaning it twice today on the show. Veno has mentioned unders here. I did not expect or see that happening by any
It's Ralph's
stretch
birthday.
here.
I got to support him.
I was going to say, my goodness here, Veno. Just want to make sure that you are feeling okay. That is for sure. All right. One other game I know that was mentioned in there, Dan, I believe was the Pittsburgh game. And wanted to know whether or not we thought, was it Pittsburgh? How many are they getting now? 8.5, I think was the last time that I saw. I'm still pissed at Pittsburgh because they should have won that damn game against Clemson, and they gave it up there at the end. But man, oh man, I don't know. Rob Veno, do they come back here against Louisville? Is this something you think happens in a bounce back?
Can I make everybody happy now, Joe, and
Can
just
you
say
go over? Yes.
Yeah, I think you have to go over. I mean,
yeah, way to go.
How else do we want to play this game? I mean, honestly, Louisville's got to be as big of a disappointment as the little bit of a close here. Pittsburgh started off so fast, but still, two throw-happy teams, two teams that don't necessarily defend consistently. It's probably much better than trying to separate the sides here in the 8 points, which I think you could make conflicting arguments both ways. But I don't think you can make a conflicting argument where this total is concerned. It's going to allow you to cash a ticket in a game that goes 31-27, for instance. Those high 50s numbers always become so common. You like to have it in the range of 55.5, 56, so you get 57, 58, 59 to yourself, but here you get 58 and 59. I think there's enough common scores here that these two can find that. Yep. Again, just two. And Pittsburgh's pace, they both play at pace, so it's kind of crazy to think that these two play callers, Jeff Fromm on one side, the first-year guy at Pittsburgh on the other side, don't run a lot of plays and score a lot of points in this one.
Yeah, it's points, and more points. That was rough. Senior day at Pitt, man, and they melted down late. That was a rough one here. Now Louisville finally playing a home game after what feels like a month and a half there. And I can't remember the last time it feels like they had a home game. I think it was Miami. And speaking of Miami, screw you, Miami, in basketball. That's a different conversation. But Drew, they're laying 3 touchdowns this week against Wake. And coming off that loss, right? This feels like a good get-right spot. But are we back to trusting Miami to drop 50 points against this Wake Forest pitiful defense here?
I think we are, Joe. I think they bounced back. They took the shot on the chin. We all knew it was coming. You can't watch Miami Hurricanes football probably since Ken Dorsey was back there taking snaps, and know they weren't going to drop a game or two. So I think they just dropped the game. They're going to bounce back here. I wouldn't be surprised if Miami runs the table the rest of their way and finds themselves into the playoffs, Joe. So I think water under the bridge, bounce back on. Let's ride the Miami Hurricanes going forward.
All right, love it. Ride the Canes there, just not in basketball, Ralph Michaels. Yes.
I'm going to add one bit of TNA to Drew's Miami pick.
Sure.
Teams with a late bye, game number 9 and later, and now they're home, a home favorite of 6 or more, like Miami is.
Right.
This applied to a couple other teams, the TCU and to Michigan as well. 88 and 50, 64% against the spread. So the late season buys for the better team have been very productive.
Love it. All right, there we got it here, guys. Across the board, we'll be back again tomorrow with the College Football Show. 5 other games on the card, plus your questions that we'll be breaking down for you. Before we get out of here, Ralph, talk to us. Coming off that 5% win a week ago and your birthday week here, what do you got locked and loaded for the folks at WagerTalk.com?
It's simple, guys. We have an incredible rest of the year football promotion. Get college football and the NFL from now through the Super Bowl. That special is loaded on everyone's page. I think that's the right way to take advantage as we get into this most exciting time of the football season.
Love that. How about you, Drew? Locked, loaded, ready to head into this week 13?
Absolutely, Joe. Locked and loaded, 5% max limit going this weekend, straight off of yesterday's clean sweep of the Maction board in college football. So got one I really like. I'll be in with the all access for NFL and college football for this weekend. So take advantage, guys. Don't pay for another pick the rest of the way, all the way through the Super Bowl. College football, NFL, rest of the year, heavily discounted. Drew Martin, WagerTalk.com.
Love it, Drew. How about it, Mr. Veno? Feels like you're locked and loaded tonight, tomorrow night, Saturday, Sunday. What do you got for us?
I'll echo what Ralph said with these end-of-the-year deals. Remember that Thanksgiving week is right around the corner here. I know everybody's interested there. And for myself, end of year, college football, NFL football has been the best time of year for me. Some numbers put up on my homepage for how I ended last year in both CFB and NFL. So good time to take advantage. As for what's going on tonight, I'd rather, because I thought the card was stronger tomorrow night, Joe. So tomorrow night, Friday night action in college football, especially, we're going to have 4% best bet up there for you. Tonight, we will have action in the NBA as well. But where college football is concerned, the stronger stuff to me was on tomorrow night's card. So find that at my homepage, wt.buzz/RV.
Love it. All right. If it is from college football to college basketball, we've got that coming up live for you here in just a couple of minutes. So don't go anywhere. Make sure you hit that like button, hit that thumbs up, and of course, hit that subscribe button. If you haven't done so already, become part of the WagerTalk TV family. As you can tell, if you're new here, nobody has more free content than we do. So become part of the family and hit that subscribe button, and come back and join us again tomorrow for another edition of the College Football Kickoff Show. But get ready. We're about 6 minutes away from the college basketball show live here on WagerTalk TV. Best of luck with your plays, guys. We'll see you tomorrow for more college football.